My name is Bill Briggs, and I'm a former official at the U.S. Small Business Administration. While I was at SBA, my job was to help implement the Paycheck Protection Program. Today, I serve as a private advisor to companies like Lendio and other lenders to help them help their customers. So today I will be answering some questions about new changes to the Paycheck Protection Program and what to keep in mind and how to benefit from this and other programs going forward. The Biden administration announced today updates to the program with the intent to allow more people and more small businesses to access the program. In particular, they were looking at how people who may have been formerly incarcerated less than a year ago can access the program, people who may have been delinquent or defaulted on their student debt, people who are permanent U.S. residents, i.e. green card residents, but may not have a social security number, and people also as well sole proprietors, allowing them to use a different payroll calculation so they may be able to get a larger PPP loan. Right now, the current round of the Paycheck Protection Program is slated to expire on March 31st, 2021. However, Congress may change the rules and laws, as they have done in the past, regarding the PPP program. If you look at this program, it's nearly a year old now, and over that time, Congress has generally tried to make the program more accessible to more small businesses. The administrations both administrations have tried to do that as well. And so it's very possible that as this pandemic is not finished, that Congress and the administration may add more changes, ultimately trying to make it easier for more small businesses and more impacted communities to access these emergency funds. So SBA is aware that many applications during this round of PPP, particularly for needed second draw loans, may have been denied for multiple reasons. And sometimes those reasons are legitimate, and sometimes there's just an error, a system error, and the lender is able to find that out and rectify it based on going back and talking to the customer. So in many instances, what SBA is trying to do now is allow the lenders to certify and say, I have looked at this error, there is a solution. We will have the paperwork and the documentation to show that solution by the time the forgiveness process begins. But right now, let's do everything we can to fund those loans immediately. The changes announced today are really meant to benefit sole proprietors and help them ultimately maybe get a larger PPP loan to help them weather the pandemic. For example, before today, the general loan calculation for sole proprietors relied on line 31 of the Schedule C tax form, and that was post-profit or net profit income. Going forward, the change will allow them to calculate their payroll amount off gross income, which theoretically would allow a higher loan amount and more funding to go to these sole props, many of whom need these funding in order to get through the COVID pandemic. The U.S. Small Business Administration has publicly announced that it's doing all it can to allow to speed up the processing of these new PPP loans for this round. One of the things that may be impacting the speed of the approval of the processing is some of the validation checks and identity management practices that the agency is implementing to ensure that the loans are compliant with program requirements and that they're going to the right people. So SBA has been aware of these new changes, and so what they're doing is allowing lenders to certify that they have the fixes to these problems, either the appropriate paperwork or that the information that was causing a delay was inaccurate, and that ultimately that they will provide this information to SBA by the time of the loan forgiveness process begins, which is after the loans have been funded. One of the things that small businesses can do to ensure that their loan is processed in the most efficient and fastest way possible, particularly if they're getting a second draw loan, is to make sure that they have all the documentation and information they used for their first draw loan. A first draw loan is also a first-time loan, and usually most people had a first draw loan in 2020. They got their first PPP loan back then. So if they're going to get a second draw or second-time loan this year, they should make sure they have all the information they used to apply last year, including the SBA loan number. They should have the information that they used, including their taxpayer identification number, to make sure that it's accurate and consistent, so that what was on the first draw loan is also on the second draw out loan application. And they should also have some general business information as well, including their payroll amounts, whether they have employee benefits such as retirement or health, and then state and local tax estimates as well. The best thing is usually to have some sort of tax documentation and or payroll information if you use a payroll provider. So if your application has been processed by SBA and all of that, the lender generally has 10 days, and in certain instances up to 20 days, to sign the closing documents and fund the full amount of the loan in a one-time deposit. So those are the rules of the program. The idea is that this is an emergency funds program, and that SBA really, that lenders should do everything they can within reason to get the funds to the borrowers within a short amount of time. One of the things that can delay that in an era of social distancing is just getting these documents signed or appropriately processed to make sure that all the lines are signed. But again, most borrowers, after the loan is processed, and that in SBA world, that means getting an SBA loan number, that you should receive those funds within 2 weeks, if not sooner than 10 days. One of the things that any small business who has had their loan denied right now is to understand first why it was denied. And in certain circumstances, if there's a reason to go back and maybe consult with a lender service provider like Lendio or a lender and see if there are now, given the new changes in the program, which allow more people to access the program, particularly those in underserved and minority communities, to see if that the changes allow them to therefore access the program. So you shouldn't give up. You should have hope. There's still plenty of money in the program right now, and the program is not expiring until the end of March. That may change as well, but I still would encourage to work with resources, including lender service providers like Lendio, and or SBA.gov has a wealth of information and resources near you where you can find additional technical guidance and assistance on how you may be able to benefit and ultimately get a PPP loan. The last day currently that you are able to apply for a PPP loan is March 31st, 2021. However, I would encourage any small business interested in a PPP loan to apply as soon as possible and to start working with a lender service provider like Lendio or any lender. So the PPP loan calculation is based on payroll amounts. Generally speaking, the loan amount is calculated by figuring out the average monthly payroll cost and then timesing that 2.5 times, and that is your PPP loan amount. However, once a small business receives and has their loan funded, they're able to use certain parts of that loan or that funding for non-payroll costs. Right now, the program requires that you use at least 60% of the loan amount for dedicated payroll costs and up to 40% for non-payroll costs. Non-payroll costs can include utilities, rent, and other things such as personal protective equipment to protect your small business or your employees from the spread of the COVID pandemic. If you use at least 60% of your money, your loan amount for payroll costs and the rest for non-payroll costs, generally speaking, you should be able to have your loan forgiven. That is the intent of the program, and SBA and the federal government and Congress want most of these loans forgiven because they see it as an important way to support small businesses. The Paycheck Protection Loan is based off a calculation of the payroll amount. And that payroll amount includes salary and wages up to $100,000 on a prorated basis annually. It includes state and local taxes, as well as some retirement and group health benefits. And so all of those factors go into the payroll calculation amount. And so what you need to ultimately to provide to your lender provider, your service provider like Lendio, or another lender, is the documentation that shows how much of those funds you've paid out over time in the last 2 years, and also some of the payroll statements or supporting information. You do have to provide some documents. A lot of times payroll firms are able to provide those to small businesses, but if you don't have a payroll, it's best to make sure that you have your tax documents and some of your bank records or statements that show how you've spent the money over the last 2 years, and therefore they can help you calculate your loan amount. There are many reasons why a loan may be held up as part of the SBA verification process. In some instances, it may be a mismatch between the taxpayer identification number. So make sure that you're using the appropriate taxpayer identification number, whether it's your EIN, which is your employee identification number, or your SSN, that you have that information there. But also, Sue, sometimes the records are inaccurate in terms of prior convictions, or if you, again, have defaulted on student debt, the program will now be changed to allow you to access the program. So if you have information, and usually your lender will understand what the issue may be, to provide that documentation that shows that you are either, that situation is no longer relevant to you, no longer applicable, and that you're able to provide such documentation. If Congress does not change the program and the program expires on March 31st, 2021, the next big thing as a small business borrower, if you have a PPP loan, to keep in mind is that you are supposed to use that money over between an 8 and 24-week covered period. Once you've spent that money, you will then keep an eye out on the forgiveness process. And again, you will work with your lender service provider and or your lender as part of that effort in order to ultimately have your PPP loan forgiven so that you don't owe any money. That's really the design of the program. So again, if Congress does not change the program, it will expire at the end of March. And the next big step is you will spend your funds and then you will begin the forgiveness process. You have one thing to keep in mind too, is that after your covered period ends, you have up to 10 months of deferral where you do not have to make payments. So theoretically, anyone who gets a loan this year should not have to make a payment on that loan, even if it's not forgiven, until next year. And so that should put a lot of people's mind at ease. But the next big step after all of these loans are made is the forgiveness process. And again, Congress and the administration will probably provide more information and make it easier for both small business borrowers and their lender service providers or lenders to go through that process. One of the things that all small businesses should do if they have received a PPP loan is to maintain their documents. Keep a simple file, very handy, so that you can provide that information of how you have spent the money. If you are one of those people who you had your issue resolved, working with your lender to provide that information, because it will be required at forgiveness stage in order to have that loan forgiven. So to keep a handy record of how you have spent the funds appropriately, and also too, that if you had an issue and it was resolved, that you clearly have those documents that show you were eligible to receive this loan and to have it forgiven. There are many forms of small business assistance right now that are out there at the federal level. The Congress and the administration have provided economic injury disaster loans, which can also help small businesses recover from this. One of the things that happened last year was SBA declared all 56 states and territories a disaster area, which allowed small businesses in all states and territory to apply for economic injury disaster loans, an EIDL loan. One thing to note is that EIDL loans are not forgivable. Unlike PPP, which loans are forgivable, you will have time to pay that back, but you do have to pay that back. If you are working in the entertainment or venue business, live venue business, for example, theaters, production houses as well, there's also a grant program called the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant Program, and that program is probably starting to get kicked off right now by SBA. All of this information can be found at sba.gov. Also at sba.gov, there's tremendous information about state and local resources that are near you, and this includes technical assistance and counseling. They also can point you to small business development centers which are located in your state. These centers can provide more information, particularly what state and county level governments may be doing to assist small businesses. So it's not only the federal government, but many state and local businesses are stepping up to try to do what they can to support small businesses and their employees. One of the things that small businesses should do is have hope. One of the messages that I'm trying to spread to all small businesses and impacted nonprofits is that there is assistance out there. Sometimes it takes a little legwork in order to find those resources, but lender service providers like Lendio and other lenders are well versed in how to help small businesses with PPP. But again, there are tremendous resources, and you should have hope as well as some patience. But there are funds, and the governments at all levels have recognized the need to support small businesses through this unprecedented time.